Hi, hello everyone. You're welcome to another future discussion show with the Transdisciplinary Agro for Future Discussion, and we are here to serve as a future think tank to endeavor to promote education and engagement high high impact industries, technologies, and everything that is necessary for humans to live a longer and healthier life. So today we're having a future discussion show where we'll be discussing and talking about uh, various innovations, inventions, and promoting the longevity movement in Africa. Right with us right now, we have our very own esteemed Dr. Aubrey de Grey, and the hostess for today is Dr. Eileen, and she'll be taking us on this journey into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Really appreciate your introduction. Hi, everybody. Welcome again. This is the TAFFDS Future Discussion Show, and I'm your hostess today. Today, we have Dr. Aubrey de Grey with us. He is the godfather of the longevity movement or anti-aging movement, and we're very honored to have him today with us. We want him to introduce himself, and then I will be asking questions about the longevity movement as well as the level longevity movement that we are about to launch. So, hello, Dr. de Grey, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah. So, would you mind to introduce to us about the longevity movement as well as the anti-aging movement? I know that those words are used interchangeably, but even though my background is in pharmacy, but having a doctor degree in pharmacy, I'm not familiar with the longevity or the anti-aging movement. So if you don't mind to help the audience to understand, just give them a big picture, and also maybe share with us why did you choose this field to be your focus. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so there's several questions there. First of all, about longevity and anti-aging. So you're quite right that these two things are essentially synonymous. But as so often in language, things get to have their own associations. So at the moment, we can say in general that the term anti-aging is used for medicines or lifestyle or diet or whatever that already exists, things that we can do today already. Whereas the longevity movement tends to be focused on things that we can't yet do. It's more focused on research, on developing things that we will be able to do in the future that are more powerful in terms of bringing aging under medical control than what we can do today. So that's a kind of, it's really just a semantic distinction, but that's the way that these words are conventionally used at the moment. So who am I? I call myself a biomedical gerontologist, which means I'm very much part of the longevity movement. And as you say, I've been quite a prominent member of it for quite some time. I am focused on the development, especially of the areas of research in this space that are neglected by other people. And there are quite a few of those because the priorities that most people have in this movement are dictated by their circumstances. So really, we can say we can divide most people who are in this movement into two classes: people who are working in the private sector and people who are working in academia. And in the private sector, of course, people want to make money, and everyone who wants to make money wants to make it tomorrow, which means that there's a huge bias towards the low-hanging fruit, the easier components of the movement, things that can get a little bit of progress. But as I will be explaining later, this is very much a divide and conquer crusade, where we have to get a lot of things working, and some of them are easier than others. So that's a problem. It leaves things out. Academia has the same problem for a different reason. Essentially, in academia, people are looking to get papers published so they can get their next grant applications funded or get promoted or whatever. And again, the sheer number of papers that you publish is really a lot of the priority, which means, again, you have to focus on the easier things so that you can get results quickly. So I have an organization called LEV Foundation, and I have led other organizations in the past. And our focus has always been on the more difficult things that other people are neglecting. And the way that we do it, the way that we escape from the trap that I just described, that academia and industry are in, is we get our funding almost entirely from philanthropy, from people, some people giving us large amounts of money, some people giving us small amounts of money, but giving us money and just trusting me essentially to know what to do with it. And that's been very effective over the past 20 years and increasingly effective over the past few years. So we've definitely made a big difference in this area. You know, I think the point about all this, well, we'll talk about, I guess, the point of why the longevity movement is important later on. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the delay in turning on the I try to help the audience to focus on what you have to say. So that's very important. And thank you so much for giving us a big picture. I still feel that what you have said maybe a bit more academic than, let's just say that a sixth grader can understand. If you are going to talk to a sixth grader, why do you think, why is that important to them? Because they have a whole life, you know, in front of them. But why is it important to talk about it now? You know, why is it important for people to donate a lot of money? Why are the Google founders and the Amazon founders are so much into this longevity movement, for example?
Yeah. So let me answer that question in several different ways. First of all, if you're a sixth grader, then yes, you've got a long time to go before you're going to suffer from the health problems of aging. But you've got parents, you've got grandparents, they're suffering now or soon, and you probably care about that. So this is not just a selfish thing, not at all. Some people often say that, well, the reason why wealthy tech billionaires are putting money into this is just for themselves. And that's not fair at all. I certainly don't do this for myself only, I do it for everybody. And I think that's the way that we should always be thinking about anything that's important to humanity, whether it's climate change or whether it's health. So that's why I work on this. In terms of why it's important now in comparison to other things, a large part is because it's possible now. 20 years ago, if I wanted to answer this question, or certainly 25 years ago, I would have had to give a fairly abstract answer because I didn't know how we were going to be able to tackle the problem of aging. I didn't know, therefore, how long it was going to take. I still don't know exactly how long it's going to take, but I have a great deal more confidence now than I had then because we have a plan. We have a very specific, detailed idea of how we can develop the necessary medical technology to bring aging under proper medical control and eliminate all of the suffering that goes with aging today. And because we've got the plan, we can put some kind of estimate for the time frame, for how long it's going to take. That's really very important in order to say, well, this particular crusade is up there, it's more important than other crusades.
All right, thank you. So along that line, I noticed I've been reading your book. I should say I've been listening to your book, and I've noticed that a lot of what you talked about is actually addressing, improving life through addressing disease states. How do you manage disease states, and what caused the disease state to happen? And then from there, because that the disease state that we're talking about is actually part of the aging process. For example, when you get older, it's easier for you to get hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, and so on and so forth. But a lot of it has to do with the aging of the cells as well. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, is this what anti-aging is about, focusing on the longevity of the cells and the health status of the cells? And also, I know that Cambridge gave you a Ph.D. according to a paper that you wrote, or a book that you wrote. Could you tell us a bit about that book, and how does that relate to the bigger scheme of things? Thank you.
Well, let me start at the end and tell you about that book, because I don't want to say much. And the reason I don't want to say much is because it was a very technical book. You don't get a PhD for writing a general audience book. So it was it covered the first half dozen papers that I wrote. It covered some very technical details about one aspect of aging, which is the accumulation of mutations in a part of the cell called the mitochondrion. But if I tried to explain all of that to a 12th grader, it would take me the whole hour that we have. So I'm not going to try and do that. About the other questions that you asked. Well, first of all, is this all about cells? Not really. We are made of not only cells, but also stuff between cells. In particular, there is something called the extracellular matrix, which is a kind of lattice of proteins that are linked together in certain ways so as to give our bodies the physical properties that they have. Like, for example, it makes our skin elastic. It makes our arteries elastic, and that's really important because it's necessary for maintaining the circulation. Of course, the circulation itself is also, it contains the blood, and the blood contains cells, but it contains a lot of other things that are outside of the cells. And all of these things are really important in aging. We have to address everything in the body, not just the cells. So that's an important thing to understand. One thing that you mentioned at the beginning of your question was the issue of the relationship between aging and disease. And this is another thing which is somewhat semantic, but it's very, very important to understand. And it's a little bit of a shortcoming of the fact that we use the word longevity to describe this movement. Because longevity, of course, means how long you live. And that's not what we work on. We work on health. I'm a medical researcher. I'm interested in keeping people healthy. And longevity is just a side effect of that. If you're healthy, you're unlikely to die tomorrow, whereas if you're less healthy, you're more likely to die tomorrow. So longevity is a side effect of health, and I work on health. And the reason that's so important to get across is that if you just talk about longevity, then people think, oh, that sounds not a good idea, because they know that when people are old, then they tend to be sick. And so people assume that the longevity movement is all about keeping people alive in that sick state of health, which is the exact opposite of what it's about. We want to extend the healthy part of life, not the sick part. We want to postpone the sick part, and eventually we want to postpone it so much that it never happens at all.
Oh, I don't mean to stop you. Actually, I just want to know and agree with you. Yeah, okay. So that really helps a lot by to explain that, because I think a lot of us are confused in terms of what about the quality of life? You're talking about enhancing, the length of life, and what about the quality of life? But I feel like we do address that, but what we're addressing, when we are addressing that, mostly would come from an angle of addressing disease states, like I mentioned earlier. What about lifestyle? Do we also include that as part of the longevity movement, that what we are doing to actually, make things better? For example, psychology. How does psychology, mental illness affect longevity?
Great questions. So, a large part of why people get confused about what the longevity movement is about is because in today's world, the quality of life and the quantity of life are in some kind of opposition to each other. It's not like what I just said in the future, where quality of life will have quantity of life as a side effect. It will confer quantity. Today, a lot of the things that we enjoy doing are bad for you. So you mentioned lifestyle, right? A lot of people do things that are shortening their life, and they're shortening their life because they are shortening their healthy life, right? So if we can develop ways to keep people healthy, then one consequence of that will be that we will not need to be quite so careful with our lifestyle and our diet and so on. We'll still need to be careful. I'm not saying stop thinking about those things. And certainly we mustn't stop thinking about those things today because we don't have these medicines yet. But in the future, the medicines that exist that keep people healthy will give us more freedom in terms of lifestyle. Now, the other thing you mentioned was psychology, was the role of mental states in all of this. And that's certainly really important to think about as well. Certainly, there is an enormous connection between the health of the mind and the health of the body. And especially there's a linkage in terms of stress. If you are constantly in a poor state of mental well-being, if you're worried about things and so on, then you make certain chemicals in the body that are called stress hormones that accelerate the aging of the rest of the body. So it's a bad idea. In general, if you look at people who live an exceptionally long time, people who live to more than 100 years old, for example, and you look at, what do they have in common? They have very little in common, but one thing that they absolutely have in common, almost entirely, is that they handle stress really well. They haven't necessarily had particularly stress-free lives, but when they encounter a stressful situation, it doesn't bother them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm also recently reading a book about happiness, and they say that they did an experiment that says that somebody who won a lottery, comparing somebody who won a lottery to somebody who become quadriplegic, basically losing the function of all four limbs, 1 year later, their happiness status go back to the original state 1 year ago. So that's very interesting to see that from that perspective. How does everybody address, happiness and stress? And I want to ask you if a manifestation of stress at a physical level is that inflammation, because there's a lot of talk about inflammation being the cause of aging.
Right. So this is a great example of how people are confused about what really is happening in aging. A lot of people think that aging is some kind of self-destruction process where in late life, the body actively destroys itself. And inflammation is a case of this, that, young adults, they don't have much inflammation. Older adults have a lot of it, and it accelerates and exacerbates things like atherosclerosis and diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. But the thing is, that's not something that happens on purpose. Inflammation is a response that is encoded in our genomes, but it's encoded there for a good reason, a reason that is helpful early in life. Specifically, it's part of the immune system. It's part of the way that we eliminate infections when we get them. And if we didn't have the inflammatory response, it would be, our lives would be shorter because we would be more susceptible to infections that we normally survive. So inflammation itself is a good thing. The problem is that inflammation is triggered by a bunch of different things. And in particular, there are aspects of aging, waste products that accumulate in the body, that the inflammatory machinery misinterprets. And, it looks at these things and it thinks, that doesn't look right. And it tries to destroy it as if it were an infection, but it can't destroy it because we don't have the machinery to destroy these waste products. So the inflammation just gets into a vicious cycle. It gets worse and worse and worse. And that does indeed accelerate the whole process of aging. But that's not because the body is deliberately trying to kill itself. It's because the body is misdirecting a good process to a bad place. So then you might ask, what do we do about that? And of course, the answer is we find medicines that can eliminate those targets, those waste products that the inflammatory response is targeting. Today, we can't necessarily do that. And that's why I'm working on developing ways in which we would be able to do it. And the reason, and so because we can't do it today, the only thing we have is to try to dampen down the inflammatory response, just to make it work less well. And that works. That does slow down the maladaptive behavior of the inflammatory response. But unfortunately, it also diminishes the ability of the inflammatory response to tackle infections. So there's only so far you can go that way. It's better than nothing, but it's not much better. And that's why we need the kind of medicines that I'm working to develop.
Very well put out. So if I understand you correctly, the problem with information is not a problem itself. I forgot to mention, some people may not understand what inflammation is. So in my very, I'm going to just say that basically it's kind of like when you say get a bite and then that place that if you have a mosquito bite and then that place swell up and then you would draw fluid to that site, and then there will be white blood cell, which is our immune system, going there and clean up and defends outsider invasion, so that to make sure that you're not that the infection doesn't spread. And that is, basically when you see red swelling, that's a sign of inflammation. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. But inflammation can also happen within the vessels. But from what I understand, what you just said is that inflammation is not a problem. It's the byproduct is a problem. And then also the overwhelming reaction of inflammation actually kind of like once you trigger the body to react in a way that is not actually healthy for the body. Am I correct?
Yes, that's basically right. The problem is the misdirection, the maladaptive targeting of inflammation to targets that it cannot resolve, that it cannot do anything about. Inflammation is designed by evolution to get rid of infections by destroying them, but it can't destroy the waste products that accumulate during aging. So that's why it does more harm than good when it targets those.
So the aging is actually a lot more to do with the metabolism of the waste products.
Or the lack of metabolism of the waste products. The fact that we create waste products that we do not have the machinery to destroy or to excrete, and so they just accumulate and eventually they become a problem. Of course, there are other aspects of aging, but the accumulation of waste products is a big part of it.
Okay, so all right, so of course, we have a lot more to talk about, but I'm going to move on to another question. So give us the history of the longevity movement or anti-aging movement, just like in a short few sentences, and then also give us some idea what are the obstacles that you're facing in terms of policies and legislative making to support what you and the other longevity activists trying to do. Thank you.
Right. Well, let me give a short history of the longevity movement. It started when we realized that aging existed and that it was horrible. And so some of the oldest stories in history are about aging. The myth of Gilgamesh or the myth of Tithonus. These are some of the oldest stories in civilization. By the Renaissance time, centuries ago, there were people like Roger Bacon and Francis Bacon in England talking about aging from a scientific perspective, saying, we really ought to try and do something about this. But nobody knew how, of course. Then it was really only after we started to develop modern medicine in the 19th century, and also, of course, after we started to understand how the body works at the level of genetics with Mendel and at the level of evolution with Darwin. All of these things happened more or less the same time, around the middle of the 19th century. After that, it became possible to make real inroads into some of the health problems of life. But initially, it was all about the health problems of early life. It was all about infections. Even in the wealthiest countries in the world, if you go back to, let's say, 1850, Literally more than 1/3 of babies would die before the age of 1. And of course they don't anymore. So it didn't take long before people started to look at the problems of late life and say, well, okay, what's going on there? How do we develop medicine for these? The whole field of gerontology began in the early 20th century, when people started to realize that the health problems of late life were self-inflicted. They were side effects, consequences of the way that the body naturally works, as opposed to being caused by external things like bacteria or viruses. And people started to realize that we need a different way of tackling them. And so first of all, they had to understand how aging works at all. And the first really strong mechanistic insight into that was in the 1950s, when people realized that there was a particular type of chemistry going on in the body called free radical chemistry that was driving a lot of aging. And then there were other mechanisms that were identified over the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Really, there hasn't been anything new since the early 1980s, which is very good news, because it means that we understand the body pretty well now. Of course, we're still discovering new details, but nothing fundamental. That's really quite important to understand. So then, of course, the question was what to do about it. Now, a lot of the problem there was that different scientists thought about aging in different ways in terms of what aging is, and therefore that led them down different paths in terms of what to do about it. So the biggest thing that I'm known for scientifically is that in the year 2000, I had a big eureka moment, I guess. I realized that the best way to develop medicines to keep people healthy late in life was something that everyone else was overlooking. It was to repair these various types of damage that are done, changes to the molecular and cellular structure and composition of the body that are caused by the body's normal operation, as I was saying earlier. So they are what aging is at the physical, in a physical sense. To restore the body's structure and composition back to how it was in early adulthood or something like that, so that the body can carry on working just as well as it does in early adulthood. This way of thinking is kind of the way an engineer thinks rather than the way a biologist thinks. It's showing that, it's remembering that the body is a machine. It's an insanely complicated machine, of course, but it's still a machine. And what that means is that its function is determined completely by its structure. So if you restore the structure, you restore the function, and you maintain the function.
So if you restore the structure, you restore the function. And what kind of structure? Are you talking about a cellular structure or the entire ecosystem that's related to the aging process?
Yeah, very much the entire ecosystem. And so as I was saying earlier, the body is not just made of cells, and we have to fix stuff outside cells as well as stuff inside cells. And sometimes it's not even fixing stuff outside or inside, it's fixing the number of a particular type of cell. So, for example, in the immune system, we see that the immune system is basically made up of white blood cells. And there are many different types of white blood cell. And in an older person, the relative proportions of those types of cell are different than in a younger person. And that's a problem. Sometimes we have too few of important types of cell and too many of less important or even damaging types of cell. Stem cells is equally, our tissues, many of our tissues are supplied by stem cells, are maintained. And the number of stem cells we have sometimes goes down. So again, that's something, if we put stem cells back, we can fix that problem.
Yeah, and I also am aware of, for example, growth hormone is at a higher level at the beginning of life, like, initial stage or the first 20 years, than later. And as well as when you talk about the aging of cells and the physical components surrounding that aging process, when we are addressing that, would you say that is wrong to focus on regenerative? Because I also heard that the regenerative medicine is used. So is regenerative and stem cell therapy part of the anti-aging treatment?
Yes,
Let's put it that way.
yeah.
Okay.
Simple answer, yes, it absolutely is. Stem cell therapy is incredibly important as part of the portfolio of medicines that we are developing that will keep people healthy late in life. Let me say a word about growth hormone, though, since you mentioned it. Growth hormone is a great example of why this field is so difficult as a scientific field and as a medical field. It turns out that if you have a lot of growth hormone early in life, while you're growing, especially even before you're born, that's bad for you. It's better to have rather less growth hormone and grow more slowly. And it turns out that animals that have deficiencies in how much growth hormone they make or in the signaling that growth hormone does, they live longer. But later in life, after you've reached adulthood, things are different. As you said, the level of growth hormone goes down, and it seems like there may be benefits to having a bit more, maybe. The reason I have to be very cautious there is because there are reasons why the delivery of growth hormone medically, by injecting it or whatever, may not be the right thing to do. See, the thing about growth hormone, like all hormones, is that the natural way in which it is made and the schedule on which it's made, when it's made, is defined by everything else that's going on in the body, by the levels of other hormones or other things. And if you just inject it, then you're ignoring all of that. So you may have, times when there is too much of it and times when there's too little of it compared to how it should be. And that is a very difficult thing to resolve. So at the moment, I definitely cannot say that you should be injecting growth hormone. I certainly can't say that. But in the future, I expect that we will have more sophisticated therapies which do maintain growth hormone levels and the levels of all other hormones at the same kind of level that they are in young adulthood.
Okay, so that brings up another question I have is, even for women, for example, postmenopausal, they're using hormonal therapy. Do you think there's an ethical component to this whole, first of all, in improving lifestyle by, say, using hormone, is that part of the longevity movement? Secondly, is there ethical concern using stem cell, have you encountered any of those debates?
So, of course, there are many debates about this, but nearly all of these debates are basically misguided. Nobody thinks there is an ethical concern about keeping people healthy. Everyone thinks, being healthy is good. Everyone wants to be healthy. Everyone wants to carry on being healthy. So the only ethical issues that can potentially come up are either ones of equity. In other words, if something is very expensive to deliver, for example, then you may only be able to do it if you don't deliver other health benefits to somebody else. That's an ethical problem. Or the question of the methods for developing for creating the medicine. So, for example, long time ago, 20 or more years ago, there was a huge debate in the USA about the ethical aspects of a certain type of stem cell called the embryonic stem cell. And that was because of the way that they were being created. You had to destroy very early embryos, 5-day-old embryos, in order to make these cells. And even though that's really early, some people said, well, it's not early enough. This is still a human being, even though it's only 5 days after conception. And so, that was a very difficult ethical issue for some people. It's more or less gone away now because we have a different method for creating essentially the same kind of cell that doesn't involve creating embryos. And this is often the case, that ethical issues may be created by the advent of technology, but they may also be resolved by the advent of new technology.
Yeah, and there was one instance when I was talking to Dr. Salman Delphi, and he said stem cells can be have such potential for disease state treatments, and all we need to do is just say collect the placenta for a stem cell bank. But even in itself, it may be controversial for people to feel like, oh, are we really supposed to use like placenta, for treatment and things like that? Anyway, that was just one thing. It was an interesting discussion. on that topic. But definitely we need a lot more research in this area. And so have you encountered any problems in talking with the government to get more money from NIH, for example, for this area of research? What do you think that we need to do to make it more supportive for?
Yeah, so governments, especially in the industrialized world, have they're very, very slow to respond to things. At the end of the day, you have to remember that these people who make the decisions in government are people who get elected, and people who get elected have only one real goal in life, which is to get re-elected. So they only really think about what the public already want. They follow public opinion. They don't define or lead public opinion. And so for a long time, I have more or less ignored the governments. But now things are changing because the general public is understanding the potential of the longevity research arena much better than before, and therefore it is becoming electorally palatable to make decisions to put more money into this. And that is happening. It's happening still rather slowly. There's a huge amount of, worrying about being accused of spending money irresponsibly, taxpayers' money. So people are still very cautious, very much too cautious, but it's gradually changing. And you've frozen. Well, so I assume we're still live. So while I'm waiting for Eileen to come back online, let me just talk about the Afro-Longevity Conference that's happening on August, I think, 21st, 22nd, something like that. No, 22nd, 23rd, in Johannesburg. This is the second conference organized by Ph.D.s on longevity, and it's going to be an extraordinary event. I was present at last year's conference. It was fantastic. It brings together everybody who's interested in longevity, whether it's people, scientists or members of the public or government representatives, lots and lots of different types of people to come together and hear where this is going. And one thing that's really, really important to understand and communicate to you is why now is the right time to be having a conference like this in Africa. A lot of people think of Africa as a country in which the health problems are mostly health problems of early life. And of course, it's true that infections that kill young people are very prevalent, very much more prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa especially than in the industrialized world. But they are becoming less prevalent every year. Africa is catching up fast. And because it's catching up, we have already reached the point where the number one health problem in Africa is aging. Just look at the statistics. There isn't a single country in the world, including Africa, in which the average lifespan is less than 50. That means that most people are reaching an age where they are suffering the health problems of late life. So aging really is not just a first world problem. It is an African problem as well. And it's going to become an African problem fast, much more of a problem for Africa with every year that goes by. So now is the time for the African continent to become educated on what's happening to bring aging under comprehensive medical control, and also to contribute to that crusade. Africa has things that other countries don't have. It has much more diversity. It has huge diversity at the genetic level and at the cultural level that can be of enormous value to the research efforts to bring aging under control for everybody worldwide. So that's why I am putting a lot of effort into making sure that Afro-Longevity is a success. I'm going to be there this year, of course, and I hugely congratulate the organizers, Osinakachi and Brenda, for putting together an organization and a series of conferences that will take Africa properly into the longevity movement worldwide. I'll stop there because I'm hoping that Eileen will be back soon, but if not, then, well, I've said most of what I wanted to say.
Back. Hello. I'm so sorry about that. My phone just kind of pooped.
No,
Can
no
you hear
problem.
me okay?
I think I was able to keep things going quite effectively. I assume that I was still online, even though you were not. So I talked a good deal about Afro-longevity and the upcoming conference and why it's important and why aging is important in Africa. I don't know whether you heard any of that, but I've probably answered your next few questions without you having to ask them.
Okay, that's great. All right. So I'm going to just go maybe. Do you feel that what you talked about has kind of captured everything that I asked you at the beginning when you were prepping?
I think so, actually, yes. I obviously wanted to talk about the conference a lot, but I also said quite a lot just now about why this is a problem for Africa and something that Africa will benefit from being involved in, and why it is incorrect to think of the health problems in Africa as being just the health problems of early life. Why now we have reached the stage where so many people are surviving from the health problems of early life that they get to the point of suffering the health problems of late life. And therefore we need to do something about it. Victor says he has a question. So
yes, let me just, if you don't mind me to just go to that a little bit, and then we're going to go to Victor's questions, which is, what do you think need to happen to make the Afro-longevity movement successful in Africa?
Really, I think Afro-longevity is already very much on the right track. Osinakachi and Brenda, the main organizers, Brenda from South Africa, Osi from Nigeria, have demonstrated not only a great deal of commitment and determination and so on, but also they're very, very competent. They know how to do this. And I am very pleased that they have chosen to have a very strong focus initially in these early stages on education. As you pointed out, Eileen, at the beginning, this is a field which is not well understood in Africa. Not nearly so well understood as it is in the industrialized world, and indeed not nearly so well understood as it needs to be. The more understanding and knowledge there is about this field, not just the scientific status, but the importance from a medical point of view, the more enthusiasm there will be to get involved, the more communication there will be globally between Africa and the rest of the world, which will have huge value in its own right to the research effort. So everything will go faster as a result of the education efforts that Afro-longevity is spearheading. And I believe that really, the main thing they need is, of course, support, governmental support especially, from nations around the continent to bring more people together, whether it's young people or others, to take courses, to hear lectures, to be involved in understanding and learning about the longevity movement and the science of longevity as fast as possible.
Thank you. So, Victor, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question, and thank you very much for your lecture thus far. I've noted some things down, and I'm truly grateful for everything you've impacted in us, in knowledge and all. Now, my question is in twofold. The first one is, from your lecture thus far, some research I've done about some of your work, I noticed you are deep into should I call it the medical research. Although you studied computer science in your undergraduate days, I'm first of all wondering, wow, that's massive. Now, what's the question to young Africans? Because I believe, according to research, Africa holds one of the youngest population on planet Earth. What is the advice you want to give to young Africans, just like myself, that are new into this longevity movement, and these seems like our first introduction to longevity? What's the advice you have for them, or what do you want to tell them, or what do you want to say to them to bring them into the forefront of their future? Because I believe this is the future we're talking about, and our future also. That's the first point.
Sure. Let me stop you there for a moment. I think there are two things I would like to say to young Africans. The first one I want to say is in relation to my own past. As you said, I was not always a biologist. I was originally a computer scientist. Not many people switch fields like that. But as time goes on, more and more people are doing that. And certainly as time goes on, more and more people are going to have good reasons to switch fields during their life. So what does that mean for youngsters, people who are still in their education? What it really means is that the most important thing that you need to learn early in life, when you're a kid, is not facts. It's not particular areas of knowledge. What you need to learn is how to learn. You need to learn adaptability. You need to learn how to use the expertise that you gained as a kid to absorb and take advantage of new information, new discoveries that nobody could teach you when you were a kid because nobody knew them. So learning how to learn is far more important than just learning. The second thing I want to say is something that I emphasized early on in this interview, but I want to say it one more time, which is you're not just, what's fulfilling in life is not just to improve your own quality of life. What's fulfilling in life is to improve the quality of life of humanity in general, whether it's your loved ones, your family, your colleagues, even people you've never met and you never will meet. When I started in this field, that's why I started doing it. And I've been working in this field for maybe 15 years when my mother died in 2011 and left me a lot of money. And I gave more than 3/4 of my inheritance to my own foundation to accelerate the research. It was very effective. We doubled the budget of my foundation for 5 years. So we got a lot done that would not have otherwise been done. And that, just by doing that, I am quite sure that by that one action, I have saved countless, thousands and thousands of lives just by accelerating the eventual defeat of aging. So think that way. Think about the impact of what you're doing on humanity.
Interesting. Think about what the impact of what you are doing on humanity. Now, the second part of the question is also about youngsters in Africa. Now, we've literally seen over and over again in research that we hold one of the youngest population on planet Earth. That's an emphasis I'll be making in my question. Now, we saw our parents and some of our grandparents suffer certain diseases as they grow old, prevalently diabetes, arthritis, and some of these diseases. Now, it's sad to see them happen to your loved ones and suddenly they just die, of which as a youngster I wanted to study medicine and surgery, but I ended up becoming an electrical and electronics engineer. Now, what was that advice you want to give to youngsters in Africa, knowing fully well that there are certain diseases that are common to Africans owing to maybe their diets, their lifestyle? What's the advice you want to give to youngsters, emphasis on the young population in Africa, to help them, should I call it stop, to help them limit the effect of these age-related diseases, emphasis on diabetics, arthritis, rheumatism, and no, these are diseases I've seen. They've affected so many persons close to me. And thank you very much.
Right. So these diseases that you're talking about, as you say, they are becoming much more prevalent in Africa. but they are the same diseases that are equally prevalent in late life in the industrialized world. Now, I want to emphasize that this makes it even more true that Africa is catching up, because not only are Africans living longer, but also at the moment, because of poverty or lifestyle, they tend to start getting the health problems of late life at a younger age than most people in the West do. Now, that's only partly true. For example, in the USA, people are getting diabetes at a younger age than they do in most countries in Western Europe. But in general, what this means is that there are things one can do to postpone the health problems of late life in Africa by improving lifestyle. But one has to remember that all the time, people are living longer, and therefore, even if you postpone those health problems to a later age, you'll still have them. People will still have them for a long time because they will live longer. Now, that can only be prevented by developing medicines that nobody has, whether in Africa or in the industrialized world, that truly prevent these health problems from occurring at all. That's what we are working on, and that's what I believe we will be able to achieve in the foreseeable future. But in the meantime, absolutely, yes, Africa is a young continent. In other words, the average age of people in Africa is younger than, for example, the average age of people in Western Europe. But that average age is going up really fast. So if you are a youngster and you want to think about the future of your country, your continent, yourself, your family, then you have to think about how fast things are changing in these ways.
So there's a question from LinkedIn. I will display it on the screen now so you answer it. There's a question.
Do you see CRISPR technology playing a role in expanding health as we age? Absolutely. CRISPR is a spectacular technology for what's called gene editing, genome editing, that was developed not long ago, really only about a decade ago. And it was initially didn't work very well, to be honest, but people saw the potential, and there's a huge amount of research that's happened since then. So now it's a really sophisticated technology, and it's going to be very soon used on people in various ways to address certain diseases, especially congenital diseases that people are born with because of some mutation in a gene from their parents. Now, it's also got enormous potential to be useful in longevity research to improve, to prevent and delay the health problems of late life. It's going to be a while before that really comes to the fore, but absolutely, CRISPR is a technology that applies enormously importantly across the whole of medical research, absolutely including longevity research.
Victor, do we have more questions before I ask a question?
No, there's no other question from our social media handles.
And I should say, guys, I only have another 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I do want to, since Victor has talked so much about the youth perspective, what does it take to be a longevity scientist? And then the second question is the time capsule question. What would you like to tell the audience, like 100 years from now? Will you please share your words of wisdom with them? Thank you.
Right. So what does it take to be a longevity scientist? Well, when people who are in high school ask me, what subject they should study for their degree in order to become a longevity scientist, I have a very clear answer. I say, don't specialize too much. You should do a general biology degree. The reason for that is simply because aging impacts biology at every level of organization. It's an extraordinarily insidious process, and that means that it means in order to understand aging, you have to have a pretty good grounding in every aspect of biology: cell biology, molecular biology, genetics, anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, you name it. You've got to know them all really well. So it's very important not to specialize too soon. Of course, once you are to research, doing a PhD or whatever, then the priorities are a bit different. You've got to do things that you're really passionate about. I always emphasize try to work in a small laboratory where you will have a good deal of autonomy. Then the time capsule question. Well, let me see. I don't really like questions like this because I always feel that it's very counterproductive to form opinions about what the distant future is going to be like. We have a lot of tendency in society to think about, for example, a post-aging world in the future as if everything else were the same, as if we all still had jobs and we didn't have automation and as if we still had climate change problems and so on. We're not going to have those problems either, So, I think really the only thing I can say in terms of a time capsule question is a very generic thing that, history matters. The best way to avoid making mistakes is to look at the mistakes that other people made and not repeat them.
Wow, I really love that. Really love that. That's amazing. All right. So this is, I promise this is the very last question. I do want to squeeze out the last minutes of the 5 minutes that I got allowance for. This is an intergenerational question. I think it's important since we're talking about longevity. How does your mother as an artist affect your outlook in terms of this longevity movement? I promise this is the last question, but I feel it's important.
Right. So that's a great question. So I grew up, as you say, with I was brought up only by my mother on her own, and I didn't have any brothers or sisters either. And she was very artistically talented. Now, she made a mistake. She said to herself, well, I'm artistically talented, therefore my son is going to be artistically talented naturally. Therefore, in order to give him the best chance in life, I shall focus his education on the science and math side of things. And she was completely wrong. The result is that, yes, I ended up being a pretty good scientist, but I have no artistic talent whatsoever. So, no, I don't think it really actually played any role in getting me where I am today.
But I'm sorry, I got to challenge that because I really feel like you have a very humanistic approach when it comes to science.
Scientists can be humanistic too. Humanitarian, I think is probably what you mean. I care about people, and I don't know why I care about people, but it's not because my mother was an artist.
Okay. I always learn so much from you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you and talking to you again at the Afro Longevity Summit in Johannesburg. And please, everybody, join us. You will meet so many of these great scientists and longevity activists. And of course, Dr. de Grey, he is the godfather of it. So come and join us. Thank you for today. And thank you, Victor, for having those great questions from the youth perspective. From now on, I'll definitely have more, you asking more questions from your end. So thank you, everybody. All right. Until next time.
Until next time. See you in Africa.
See you in Africa.
Good.